Good morning. Um, Thank you for being here. I'm Jamal Jones, licensed marriage and family therapist and growth coach for therapists in private practice. And what a joy and a privilege to be here with a beloved colleague in the industry, Mr. John Still. And he and John Still is going to introduce himself. He's also a licensed marriage and family therapist, and very excited that he has a podcast that he is launching, and he has so many great things going on in his life and in his practice. So much fun to partner with him. Yep. And this morning, he and I are just going to have a conversation centered around the topic of taking inspired action and having consistent movement as an entrepreneur. This is a topic that has become near and dear to my heart, with this being my fourth year in business myself. And John will tell you more about his background. But having said that, I'll just go ahead and turn it over to you, John. Can you kind of share with our audience, like, how did you and I end up coming here this morning and talk, and us agreeing to talk about inspired action and movement, especially when you're experiencing things like self-doubt, fear, and anxiety as a small business owner and entrepreneur?
Yeah, man. Well, Jamal, it's a pleasure, my man. I'm super excited just to be able to be here and chat and talk. And I mean, as you're just laying it out, right? I mean, I think a big part of this, journey has been just a lot of that inspired action, a lot of that movement. I mean, right, like we got connected pretty early on in my journey. I'll put it that way, right? I know you've been in it and doing it. For me, at least in the LMFT world, for me, it was the route of, working at a group practice for a long time, was there for a while. And then as of January 2023, made the jump, right? And it was, man, going through it, there was so much, that was a part of it. And so, I mean, what we probably connected, I want to say maybe about mid-year. I think it was right around there, 2023. I mean, I saw you pop up on Facebook. That's where I saw you. And we go way back. We go back college days. We go back FCA. We go back, like just being collegiate athletes, and man, like just all the way back then. And so it was so cool. I just remember seeing you pop up, promoting your private practice. And I was like, I know this guy. We got to connect, we got to make this happen. And then kind of the journey has been from there.
Well, John, as you talk about your story, there's people out there who can really resonate with that part where, in your case, you were part of a group practice, and you also made that decision to become a licensed marriage and family therapist. So along that journey of getting licensed and working in a group practice, there's many people who have a similar journey who may currently be working for a group practice, or perhaps they're working for a community mental health,
for
or
sure,
some other W-2 situation. And I can remember, working as a W-2 employee, and the thought of having my own practice felt overwhelming. I felt insecure. Others are doing it. I can hear people on podcasts sharing their success stories. People that I went to school with, are cross paths with, while unlicensed, are doing it. But I can't do it. It's just too much. And if I do it, how in the world am I going to cover my, health insurance? How am I going to make sure I have enough income for my family? What if I don't make it? I mean, there's all these different doubts and fears that we wrestle with before taking that leap. Would you mind sharing with those out there listening who may want to be like you, John, who may want to have their own podcast, who may want to have their own private practice? How did you overcome those barriers internally?
Man, and it's I love that, right? Just being able to really bring these, whether it is, right, it's the fears, it's the doubt, it's the the perceptions maybe that you see of other people. And my story just leads into, I think at some point there was this spot of being in I had a great experience too as a group private practice. But really for me was being able to kind of start naming some of those doubts, kind of acknowledging them and like telling myself, this is actually natural. Like you and I were just chatting about this beforehand, right? I think one of the things that came to mind is this voice that can come in sometimes and say like, why don't you have it all figured out? Like you should have it all figured out. But if I can take a step back, and many times having to do that, giving myself the space to say, no, this is all new, right? Like this is all new. And how is it new? And I'm supposed to have it figured out. That just doesn't make sense.
Well, John, you bring up a very interesting point here because especially for those folks, there are some people who actually identify as being perfectionist, meaning that these are the type of people who want to have all their ducks lined up in a row.
Just a little bit. Yeah.
Now, thank you for being honest about that. The catch-22 to that is there's times when we have an aspiration or a goal and we're trying to prepare for it. Even in the case for somebody who's single, who one day wants to get married. I remember when I was single, I spent all this time, I want to prepare to get married. I want to prepare to become a family man. Well, now that I'm married and I have a family, I now can say with full transparency, I would have never become fully prepared. Maybe more confident. Maybe a little bit less discomfort. That sense of being like fully prepared and ready and having a plan outlined and predicting everything that's going to happen and having a backup plan or a contingency plan for when things don't go the way. So for that person or those folks listening who feel stuck, like they're stuck working in their W-2 and they have a dream, but they're stuck because they feel paralyzed by fear. How do you overcome that?
Oh, man, yeah, they're right. Like there's that stuck moment, right? And the paralysis that happens there. I think you're just, you're naming it. And I think that's one of the key parts of it is part of that ability to name it and be with it for a sec, right? Like not let it overwhelm you. And that it being, right, whether it's fear, whether it's doubt, whether it's self-criticism, whether it's so many of these things that are a part of this journey. They exist for their own reasons, but being able to acknowledge them and say, that's okay. Like this is a part of the journey, I think can take a lot of that stuck away from it, like allow it to kind of move through to where then action can happen, then you can move forward.
Oh, but John, now somebody's listening and they're saying to us, whoa. Look, I grew up in the inner city, or look, I grew up in a family where my parents taught me, or I grew up in a neighborhood or where I got to save face, right? People know me as being strong and competent and having things together and being on the ball and being a high achiever. And you're telling me to name my fear. You're telling me to name my insecurities, to name my imposter syndrome, to name, whoa. I got to save face.
Hey, right? You got to. You can't do that. You can't touch that. No, right? I mean, what's crazy about it, because I think in so many ways, as you name that, right? And I appreciate when being able to say, and maybe, right, like I know my experience, right? Like part of my identity and still is this athlete, right? Grew up an athlete. Like it was something that carried me through. Love it. Still love it. It's part of what my podcast is about, right? But like with that athlete piece, there was so much of what you're saying, right? Having to save face, can't show like weakness, in what this naming and acknowledging is. The reality is, though, is it still exists, right? Like it didn't go anywhere. Like just because you're trying to save it and save face in that way, it still exists. And so there's like this, there's this formula. I'm trying to remember exactly where it could have come from. If I think of it, I'll share it. But this idea of suffering, right? Pain times resistance equals suffering.
Mm.
And really in that formula, the place of control is resistance.
Interesting. I'm going to use part of my story to help unpack this here.
Go for it.
Because I was working a W-2 position, and it was one of the highest paying positions in our industry, working at the downtown county jail. It was an hourly, so it included overtime. But it was, in terms of my own mental health and my own self-care and like having work-life balance, I mean, looking back, I could honestly say that at one point in time, I knew internally I wasn't in the best working environment. And I knew internally that it was spilling over into my relationship with my wife, and which also spilled over into our relationship with our daughter. At the time was age 2, age 3. So not only my immediate family, but also other relationships in my life, the stress and the pressure was spilling over. Yet and still, right, I was licensed and I was choosing to be in that relationship with that W-2 employee. Now, for me, John, my story is different than yours in the sense of I actually got fired, right? So getting fired, it was unexpected.
Yeah.
And I'm still embarrassed to talk about it, but even now talking about it is part of my healing process because that's very humiliating.
Yeah. For sure.
But what it did was it kind of brought me to a crossroads, John, where I had to ask myself, taking all things into consideration, am I going to go out there and start applying for and interviewing for other W-2 positions? Or am I going to pursue my dream?
Yep.
The same dream I had when I decided to enroll in graduate school.
Yep.
Where when I enrolled in graduate school, I knew that I wanted to get licensed. And I said verbally to people unapologetically that one day I want to have my own private practice.
Yep.
So for me, in one sense, you can say getting fired brought me to a crossroads. Had I not got fired, John, I probably would have still figured out how to stay in that unhealthy relationship.
Yep.
And I would probably be there right now.
Yeah.
Now, the quality of my life and the quality of my marriage, my family, who knows? But as I share my story with you, when you think about this sense of like, everybody has their own story and everybody has these moments where they got to decide to like play small, be shy, operate from a place of fear, or to, like, in your words, move forward consistently amidst the doubt and the fear. Share with the audience your thoughts.
Man, I mean, right. And, I can acknowledge, Jamal, I appreciate, right, what that vulnerability is as you share your story, because it's so true. Like this, we all we have those moments. And as entrepreneurs, I know for me, one of the spots, probably one of the places I can remember myself getting stuck, which looking back at it now, I chuckle a little bit. I had the hardest time naming my practice. I could not name my practice for the life of me. I was struggling so hard with it, and it's just like one of those things I look back at now, and I'm like, and it's so complex, right? There's so much context to that moment, but you're talking about like these stuck things, you're talking about your story, right? And in sometimes life just throwing it at you, and that's what I hear, right? Like as you're speaking that, and then other times I know for me, I made the choice, to leave that group practice at the time that I did. And I think when you were talking about the balance, the quality of life, you mentioned like this dream, I had to keep that dream in front of me, and I'll say too, at the time, I didn't even quite know exactly what that dream was, but there was something about keeping that dream in front of me, this idea of being my own, right? My own private practice owner, right? I knew at some point I was looking to also do this, current podcast, right? And the ability to be creative, that's something that's inside of me. I just love that stuff. And so I had to really remind myself of that dream. I think that's what, as you were talking about it, I was reminded of that. I was like, okay, yeah, I had to take moments amidst the overwhelm and be like, what do I see?
Now you have some qualities that are often talked about amongst entrepreneurs. It's like you had some comfort and security in the group practice.
Yep.
You had a caseload.
Yep.
And you had a steady flow of income. You had referrals. But many entrepreneurs can identify with being in a very comfortable situation for them, but feeling limited, feeling restricted when it comes to operating in their zone of genius, when it comes to unleashing their dreams. In your words, being innovative and creative. And for an entrepreneur, that can feel like a prison. It can feel like, yes, you're waking up and you're showing up for work every day. You have your, your schedule, whatever it may be. And even though you have the steady flow of income and you have the security or perceived security of the job, there's a lack of fulfillment. There's a lack of satisfaction. There's some discontentment. There's some incongruence, because just like you're grateful that you're able to do what you do, but you also know internally that you have so much more to offer. And if you had the courage to take the leap into private practice, you would have the freedom to come up with your own name, to come up with your own brand, to have more say in the type of people that you work with or don't work with.
Big time.
So what has it been like for you? In your case, you actually eventually named your practice.
As you want to, right? Like Jon Steele Therapy. That's the name, right? It's just so, I crack myself up, man, at it. It just die at that one. But right, like when it came down to it, and maybe this speaks to, amidst the doubt and overwhelm, there was a point in time where I was like, I got to get it done. Like I got it. And this was where that movement piece, I know we talk about inspired action, right? We talk about movement, you and I, right? And I think that's where this idea of movement came to mind. It was just this spot that I knew that, okay, like whether I have it completely figured out or not, this next step is going to help. Right? This next, whatever it is. And for me, maybe at that point, I remember just like, okay, I just got to write down names, right? I literally just got to get them down on paper. So like, instead of it getting all stuck in here, let's do it. Right? So then it was like writing it down, and man, and then it's like, okay, I'm having a hard time making a decision, right, on this, And so then it was just like, okay, let's just roll with, and in this case, Jon Steele Therapy. Right.
And at some point, once you had the names written down, I imagine whether you put it in writing or you had some kind of agreement within yourself, at some point, you had a deadline to make a decision.
Yes. Yep.
Because sometimes we avoid, right? We avoid making the decision.
Yep.
One of my coaches I played for in college used to always say, the deadline triggers the process. And it's so important for us as entrepreneurs when it comes to that movement and inspired action to create and set and do our best to keep our own deadline.
Yep. Big time. As you were saying that, right? Like you were just pulling the thoughts right out of my head, right? As you were saying that, it's just, it was these And, in this case, I look back and it's kind of these smaller deadlines, right? Like, I think when I started out, I put these big deadlines on myself, the kind of all encompassing deadlines of I gotta, whatever it is, I gotta open my practice by this date, right? And then I just look at that and be like, oh, what is right? And so it kept on breaking down for me, right? Until it was like, I got to name myself by, November 15th, whatever the date was. I can't even remember now, right? But I got to put that kind of deadline down. And I love that. The deadline then being able to enact, right? The process. Okay, here we go. Then I'm writing it down. Right. Then I'm crossing them off, then I'm asking people about it. Right. And November 15th comes around and I'm like, done, that's the way. Yeah.
And in terms of being congruent in your decision-making and your movement, you knew your true priority. You knew that, and I also knew, no matter how afraid we were, no matter how much insecurity that we had, we both had a sense that our true priority was private practice one day. So when it comes to having that inspired action, I think one of the keys is to just to have clarity about, what are your truest priorities? What's really most important to you?
Yep.
And as we clarify our true priority and what's most important to us, we make the decision to name our business.
Yep.
And set a deadline, and that deadline creates more of an urgency, a positive urgency.
Yeah. Right.
You make the decision, and then you move on to the next. Yeah. So, an example for me, so the first name to my practice was Central Valley Christian Counseling Services, a long name. And I want to share that just from the perspective of I did choose a name, and later I changed the name to Central Valley Christian Council Incorporated for legal reasons, but also I want to highlight for our audience that, look, just pick a name, right? Yep. Sometimes you can make it. Yep. You make a decision as an entrepreneur, as a human being. Yep. You do reserve the right to change your mind when you gather more information, circumstances change.
Yep.
So just make a decision.
Yep.
Continue to have that movement and know that you can change your mind when you need to.
Man, I wish we would have had this conversation in the very beginning when I first was starting, because that spot right there, that I can change my mind. I can actually change that name. I would have looked at you and been like, no, I can't. What are you talking about? Like, that's not the way this works, right? I have to be able to put my name out there. That's going to be the most unique name in the world. That's going to give me the best brand in the world, right? That's the perfection, right? The perfection, just like the perfectionist just coming out strong at me. And that spot right there, the ability to change my mind, change my name, like those kinds of things, that gave me a little bit of breath. Literally, like, just I'm gonna be okay.
And actually, as an entrepreneur and small business owner, the ability to change our minds is actually important. Because with every decision, we are getting more feedback.
Yep.
We are gathering more information. We are meeting new people and being exposed to new possibilities. And in terms of surviving in business, I'll share another example. I started with a tech company, right? I didn't have to do that. I could have gone a different direction. But at that point in time, considering the fact I had just got let go, and in my case, I was looking to get some revenue coming as quickly as possible. Boom. I was open in about a month with that strategic partnership. And what it did was it allowed me to get acclimated to providing services online, because that's one skill that I'm still leveraging even today. Before private practice, I was just seeing people in person.
Big time.
So even though I was getting undercut in terms of how much I got paid by the tech company, I was still acquiring a whole new set of skills to leverage. And then later, I was able to change my mind about the tech company. And I was able to adjust and adapt and say, I can keep leveraging these skills I've acquired, but I can leverage it with a EAP, an employee assistance program, and get reimbursed at a higher rate. And then later I had to adapt to become more of a private pay model. So just for our listeners, and John, feel free to add more here, it's just that sense of knowing that we're committed to our entrepreneurship. We are committed to our business. But the method, the ways in which we get to our desired destination, is not going to be linear.
Yeah.
Most likely it's going to be some curves.
There's going to be, right, all over it. As you're talking about it, the term that comes to mind for me that I've landed on when you're talking about that ability to change your mind is this idea of pivoting. I heard this, right? Like this idea, like you got to pivot, so like there's a difference. So basketball, I grew up playing basketball, love basketball, right? So when you, have your pivot down, your ability to change directions is all over the place, right? So like you can move back, but still be planted, right? And where you're going, right? You can move to the side, right? You can there's that pivot. Another pivot kind of metaphor as well that I heard was in boxing, right? Like when you go to box and you pivot, yes, you might be retreating, but you're still ready to move forward and you're not stuck, and that ability to change your mind, right? That you're talking about, the ability to pivot, can I think go such a long ways in so many things, even in the little things. I think I landed on this one pretty quickly on, in some of my own, whether it is like expectations, and when those expectations, especially for me in being active, was a thing, right? So whether it's workouts, right? Whether it's, trying to keep that physical movement going, I went from this idea of, okay, like today, I want to run, right? Today, I want to run 5 miles, right? I want to get my 5-mile run in today, right? To get that down. And for me, there was a lot of this, life just didn't allow for that, right? Young kids, right, were around, right? And just trying to figure out the time and space that I had. So then it went from, okay, I'm going to try and maybe like do a mile today and run. Okay, I can't get outside today just because of whatever's happening, right? So I'm going to keep pivoting, right? And I'm going to keep pivoting and I'm going to get to this place of, man, all as I got in today was a 10-minute stretch.
That's a wonderful way to describe this concept of pivoting. And as you're talking about it, John, what came to my mind is I have this image in my mind of a basketball player who catches the ball, who receives a pass, and he turns around and faces his opponent, and he's a threat for a jump shot. He's a threat to go right. He's a threat to go left, depending on what he sees in the defender and the defense.
Yeah.
And more times than not, unless he chooses to pass the ball to somebody else, so that's a fourth option, jump shot, right, left, pass the ball. As entrepreneurs, that's our posture. And we got to decide what's our next move.
Yeah.
What's the next most important decision?
Yep.
That's in the best interest of our business, that's in alignment with our do, our have, and our be.
Yep.
And with that, we got to shoot that ball expecting it to go in, but open to the possibility that it might not go in.
Mm.
We go right to the baseline,
Yep.
expecting to clear our defender and get to the basket and make the
Yep.
bucket, but
Yep.
also open to the possibility that another defender might come. So at some point, we're aware of perceived barriers, different barriers are different threats to us.
Yep.
Go anyway. Make the decision. Move forward.
Right. If you don't move, right, in this case, and like the goal, putting the ball in the hoop, right? Like that being the goal, the vision, the dream that you have, right? If you stay, and you don't make that move, you're stuck. You're overwhelmed, right? Like that's where some of the fear and the doubt and the anxiety, right, can really get to that place. And so being able to remind yourself, I think one, right, that it's natural. We were talking about that earlier, right? You are acknowledging that stuff is natural, right? And then you're trying to make that first step, like I gotta name myself, right? I can't do anything if I don't name myself, right? I got nothing to put out there if I don't. That's like a step, right? I mean, I could run this metaphor of basketball all the way down the line. And I'm like, I don't know how far, but I mean, it's there, right? And then there's this idea of pivoting. When you make that step, right, there's a good chance that something else is going to pop up, right? And this ability to make some of those changes is, I think, huge.
Now, what about those times when we genuinely feel like we failed, or we're experiencing some genuine feelings of disappointment, or we're looking back and regret creeps in? For me, John, I've really come to embrace this growth mindset of the more you make decisions, the more you take action. I think of failure more as perceived failure. Because now I'm more comfortable with failing than I've ever been. And I think for me, it happened when I experienced my greatest failure in my life, when I got let go. Because I had never experienced failure at that degree in terms of letting myself down, as a man of faith, feeling like I let my God down. As a family man, feel like I let my family down. But what it did for me was it let me know that I could cope with the worst case scenario if it were to happen. And it helped build resilience in me as a human being, resilience that transfers over into this journey of entrepreneurship. Can you share with the audience, some people are paralyzed by fear. Some people don't want to take action because they genuinely believe right now in their mind that they're an imposter. Some people, even though they're trained and they're qualified to serve other people and they're having an impact, some people have this belief that they're not worthy to have their own business. They're not worthy to get paid for providing their service, so they rather volunteer. Can you offer any insight or words of encouragement to our listeners around those areas?
Man, those are the deep ones, right? I mean, I know we were joking earlier about, getting stuck on names, right? And what that means. But now it's bringing the big guns in. And it's true. I mean, those types of failures or fear of, right? That's the perfectionist piece coming into mind for me. That's been something that I've had to work on and be aware of. I would say one of the things for me that's been one of the most impactful is really kind of the idea of self-compassion, this idea of kindness towards self, the self-compassion piece that the most probably I've learned from is a lady by the name of Kristen Neff. And just these concepts of how is it that you talk to yourself, You know, how is it that inner dialogue, especially when failure happens? And there's this spot where when self-kindness can come into play, it gives you a lot more space and freedom to, in this case, I like what you're saying too, quote unquote, fail, right? Like, I think however you can reframe that and get this kind of perspective change on failure, that failure is a part of the journey. It's a reality. It needs to happen because that's how we grow. If we don't have failure, where is the growth in that? You know, so wherever that perspective shift and change can happen to, well, failure is not like this bad word, right? Like what it really is an ability to grow, an ability to change, and an opportunity, you know, that happens in so many ways.
Now, and another thing that comes up for us, John, as small business owners, entrepreneurs, is this sense of being seen, being heard, being more visible. Because when I'm at LMFT working for a company, that's it.
Yep.
But when you're a mental health care practitioner in private practice, you are now representing your own name, your own brand, your own reputation, and we have to become more comfortable with promoting ourselves, talking about ourselves, and what do we offer people, and how do we offer people. And the more that we are seen by other people, the more that we are heard. There's that fear of rejection.
It's a big one.
And the reality is that not everybody is going to see the value in what we offer them. Not everybody is going to benefit from our service, our offerings. So what would you tell the audience when it comes to like marketing and advertising? Like for you, I mean, for you to start this mental fitness podcast, that, to me, that takes so much courage, because this is now John Steele's podcast. This goes along with the brand of John Steele Therapy. And by you choosing the name after yourself, right? My name is Center by Christian Counsel.
Yep.
Yours is John Steele Therapy. So how do you work through this ongoing, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but this sense of like being rejected as a businessman, as a podcaster?
And so many, right? Like so many areas of life. Rejection is that deep one. You know, rejection is, I think, a lot of where that fear, especially transitioning from whether it's group practice, whether it's agency work, W-2, right? Like when you are moving to that spot of entrepreneur, you are even more so putting yourself out there, right? Like I think of the word vulnerable, you know, and what vulnerability that is, the courage that's represented in that, you know, and what it means to have to face rejection. I know for me, you know, so if you talk about putting your name out there as an entrepreneur, this maybe in this case, this podcast journey for me, right? What it means to have this out there more and more in the world. Like that's something that brought up even more so from, you know, like I recall in private practice in LMFT, some of the rejections of getting ghosted by a client, right? Like, right. You're there, you're helping them, you're doing your best, you know, and all of a sudden they're gone. And you're like, right? Like it's all this stuff. What did I do? You know, did I say something wrong? Was it? And then it had to go from that process to, I think for me, getting the confidence in myself, right? Like I'm doing the best I can. I will do the best that I can. And it's not necessarily about me. I don't know what their situation is, right? I don't know what's going on for them in life, you know? And so I think with that has just had to build over time into from that client one-on-one experience to opening up my own practice, right? And finding some of those rejections along the way, right? To now it's at a different level of me trying to get my actual voice out there, my actual face out there in this, entrepreneurial content creation kind of world. And now it's, opening myself up more and more to that.
And as you're talking, some things that come to my mind, John, that has helped me deal with that, being vulnerable to my family, vulnerable to my local community, vulnerable to being on social media, like times like this. One is alignment. Every person, product, or partnership isn't necessarily in alignment with the vision that you have for your practice. Like if someone's into mental fitness and they enjoy listening to podcasts while they run, well, that person would be an excellent fit for the mental fitness podcast. But if somebody just, mental fitness isn't their thing for whatever reason, and they prefer to see people live in person when they hear them speak for motivation, then for that person, mental fitness podcast isn't a good fit. So one thing is just us as entrepreneurs being aware that, again, knowing our true priorities, knowing our brand, and knowing who we're called to serve, and with the understanding, knowing that everybody isn't going to be in alignment.
And that's okay. And that's okay. Right? Like, that's okay. I remember, I was jumping in on you real quick, but I remember those moments even early on as an LMFT and really having this space of, a heart to serve, right? Or heart to help people in these ways. And I'm like, I can help everybody, and it's like, I want to help everybody, but that just doesn't happen. It doesn't make sense. It can't happen in that way, and getting the confidence to align is exactly what I think is that process, and so I was just recalling that as you were talking about it, just that journey of going to that place of like, oh yeah, I can help them. I can help them. I can help them. And then I'm running into things and I'm like, no, like my alignment here is off, and it's a learning process to find that alignment, being open, to get into that alignment and saying, okay, these are specific areas, right? Like I work with anxiety, grief, and trauma, in ways, right? I really hone in on being able to work with, athletes, right? High performing professionals, like those are kind of areas that I've had to keep kind of aligning. And now I'm talking about mental fitness, and what that means, right? So it keeps moving, and I think it keeps aligning. But I love that, what you're talking about, in regards to being able to be okay with it not aligning with everyone, even though sometimes it feels like.
And because you're clear on who you're called to serve, I know that if there's anybody in the state of California who has an interest in baseball or in athletics, and maybe it's somebody who has a son or a daughter in their junior year at high school and they're overcoming an injury, or maybe it's a college athlete who does value mental health and they want to have a competitive edge to earn that starting position as a pitcher, or a different position on the team. Right? If I talk to anybody in the state of California who is into athletics and who understands the connection between their mental fitness, their mental health, and how it can either improve and create optimal performance and help them be the best version of themselves, man, John Steele's your guy.
I'll be there. I'll be there.
If you're a college athlete, or even if you're not an athlete, you're like a high achieving performer type person, somebody who values productivity and being the highest version of yourself, and you're grieving, and you need somebody to walk alongside you with your grief, while at the same time you show up and still perform the best you can in your daily obligations. And John Steele's your guy. So I really appreciate how clear you have become about who you're called to serve. And I'll end with this, John. If we're not visible, if we don't get our names out there, there's people who are praying right now for the right fit. They're looking for a therapist. They're looking for a podcast that can be a solution for them, that can be a source of healing, a source of hope. And so as entrepreneurs, right, for our listeners, if they don't build the courage to be visible and to be seen, man, that person whom you're called to serve can't find you. And so that's the heartbreaking part about when we shrink, when we avoid, when we play small, is there are people out there who are our assignment. But it's our responsibility as entrepreneurs to let them know that we exist and how we can help.
Yep. Man, I love it. Got to be visible. Got to be visible. That's something that I'm working on, right? And it's a process, right? There's a journey to it. You know, and as you're speaking about it, I just keep thinking, you know, what it means to keep kind of this movement happening, this inspired action, you know, happening towards what you already exist within you, right? Like these dreams, these visions, these important, you know, pieces of whether being able to, help specific clients, help get a message out, you know, in regards to, I know for me, something like this idea of mental fitness and being able to really share it. But the visible piece, you know, is important, big time.
Well, John, before we wrap things up, can you tell the audience more about your mental fitness podcast? How do we follow you there? Also, if you have any openings for your therapy practice that's based in California.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that, man. I mean, okay, so first off, the podcast piece, right? It'll be kicking off. So it's one of these things kicking off March 4th. Is going to be kind of the kickoff date, and looking forward to it and excited. The podcast itself is called Mental Fitness Stories with Jon Steele. And so it'll be accessible, right? Like if you search that Mental Fitness Stories, you know, it'll be able to find it on your podcast platforms. That will be available. Again, March 4th is really when it's going to start kicking off. It's going to be, you know, episodes of whether it's you'll hear me, myself, or be able to hear some interviews. I got one with Jamal here, which I'm super excited about letting out into the world. So that's one place if you're listening to it. If you want to watch it as well, I've got a YouTube channel. So Jon Steele Therapy is the YouTube channel. You'll be able to go on and watch some clips and, you know, videos of that. So, man, it's been a journey and it's super exciting. Got some overwhelm as well. So, and some vulnerability and some courage happening in the whole thing. But that's one. As far as the Mental Fitness Stories with Jon Steele is the podcast. As far as clients and what that looks like, I do have openings, and that's at Jon Steele Therapy. So you can find me. JonSteeleTherapy.com is my website. You can find me on Facebook as well as Jon Steele LMFT is that one on Facebook. And so there is, just trying to think if there's anything else. I think that's it, you know, for right now. In regards to how you find me. And then I think I mentioned the YouTube channel as well. So that one's Jon Steele Therapy. So
John, it's always fun to connect with you. Thank you so much for your time today. And I look forward to our next project together.
Yes, you bet. Gonna keep it going, man. There's no doubt. Looking forward to it. So I appreciate you, Jamal, big time.
And to all our listeners, thank you for gracing us with your ears. We hope that this conversation was vulnerable and transparent and in some way adds value to you so that you can have more clarity, confidence, and courage about your next steps in your personal life or your professional life. This idea of being able to take inspired action and have consistent movement, regardless of feeling like an imposter in the face of fear, in the face of adversity. It's really a crucial life lesson, particularly for entrepreneurs. So me and John really hope that you guys are encouraged. And we'll see you next time.